The Brexit bill gets through its final hurdle in the House of Commons in the UK this afternoon, with the bill sailing through Parliament unamended thus far. Focus then switches to trade talks with Europe. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says held preliminary talks in London yesterday, with the EU nervous about meeting the December 2020 deadline. Let's get some reaction now from Brussels, from our correspondent Lucy Hough. Lucy, thanks so much for joining us. So another huge step towards Britain leaving the European Union and Europe having to deal with losing a major partner.
Yes, things are moving quite quickly at this stage. The bill has now reached its third stage in the House of Commons. It's expected, if all goes to plan, according to Boris Johnson's expedited plan for his Brexit bill, that should become law by the 27th of January, and the UK will then be set to meet that deadline of January the 31st. The EU still needs to ratify that bill here in Brussels, but if all that goes to plan, trade talks can officially start on March the 1st, but that really is the start of a very, very complicated process. As you were saying there, the new president of the EU Commission was in London yesterday for talks with Boris Johnson, the UK Prime Minister. Warm words between both of them. Both sides were keen to stress that these were positive, constructive talks, but I think we are seeing some real differences. Boris Johnson is working hard to ensure that he can secure a comprehensive free trade agreement, but on the EU side, Ursula von der Leyen was keen to stress that really the timetable for this is incredibly tight. They are looking at a brutal timetable to get this through, essentially 7 months when you look at the timetable to rework 47 years of the UK's membership of the EU. She had a clear message about close regulatory alignment, that if the UK goes ahead with plans to diverge, that will cause problems. Of course, Boris Johnson is keen to diverge from EU rules in key sectors such as financial services. That could mean that there will be a less close relationship moving forward. So we are really seeing those key differences already. The EU also had a message about prioritisation. It doesn't think it will be possible to put together a comprehensive free trade agreement. So it's going to look at key sectors, a sector-by-sector piecemeal approach, focusing at least initially on fishing and tariff-free trade. So a very complicated process, and we really are at the start of it at the moment. A warm meeting in London yesterday, but certainly this really is just the start of a difficult few months.
Well, come December 2020, which, as you say, is a very short timetable, if by then they haven't really sorted out much, does that then mean that Britain leaves regardless?
Well, certainly Boris Johnson, the UK Prime Minister, has ruled out any possibility of extending that transition period. He has been very, very clear about this. Certainly the EU would welcome an extension of that. There is a meeting, an EU Council meeting in June, which would be the last stage at which Boris Johnson could ask for that transition. So certainly there is some words from the EU side that would be the moment to decide whether or not this really 7 months, when you take away the ratification process next month here in Brussels, it's all that remains. So if it is clear at that point that there is not enough time to put together even a bare bones agreement, that may be a conversation that's had at that point. But certainly that is not something that the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson is willing to countenance at this point. So I think both sides are trying to find a solution to that at the moment. And the solution appears to be a more piecemeal approach, putting a sector-by-sector approach to these negotiations, looking at a few key areas, sort of ticking them off as they go, rather than an everything is on the table approach and we're looking at a big win at the end of the negotiating period. So they are trying to rework the EU's traditional negotiating strategies to try and accommodate the risk that the UK would fall off a cliff edge at the end of the transition period.
So one of the sticking points in the last few years has been this Northern Ireland backstop story, and I wonder where it fits in the coming months.
Well, the Northern Irish backstop was really one of the key parts.
Looks like we've lost Lucy Hough there, who's busy explaining to us, of course, the developments that are taking place. The House of Commons in the UK pretty much now doing the last bits of parliamentary work in passing the bill that will see the United Kingdom leaving the European Union at the end of this month. And then after that, they've got 11 months until the end of December to come up with a trade deal between Great Britain and the European Union. And that is what is believed to be what's going to be very tricky. The EU doesn't believe that it can be done in such a short period of time, but British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has promised his electorate, who gave him that overwhelming majority in Parliament, that Britain will be completely done by the end of December, and they won't extend that. But there could be compromises along the way. All right, we'll continue to follow that story for you, but one of the hurdles, and that's passing the bill in Parliament with an overwhelming majority. Boris Johnson likely to get to the next step, which is Britain leaving the European Union as a member on the 31st of January.